I see my guest in the background. She's primming herself. There you go. Vanessa Beeley.
At least I can hear you this time.
Yes.
I'm
How
good.
you doing?
I'm good. I'll just lower the camera a bit. I'm good. I'm fine, thank you. There's quite a big storm going on here, so I was slightly worried when I couldn't get on that was, I don't know, interfering somehow.
No, that was a
you never
technical
know
glitch.
In Lebanon.
Well, StreamYard. So I tried to build one StreamYard thing. It built two instead. It gave an error that it shouldn't have gave. And so when I got rid of one, the other one was sending people to the wrong location. And so I had to reset had to reset the system. I used to build software, as I used to talk about audience. I was a software engineer for 10 years. And we used to build stuff like this. And so, I'm feeling how it is to be on the other end of how this stuff works.
Yeah, I'm hopeless at all of this. So I was just panicking, thinking, oh God, it's the Wi-Fi here. So
when you were like, let me restart my computer, I was like, no, don't do it. Don't restart your computer. Your computer is fine. But for the audience, Vanessa Beeley, international investigative journalist. You can follow her work. Well, still on Twitter, at Vanessa Beeley.
Yeah.
And you can read her articles. Where can they read your articles now? This may be old.
No. Substack is the main one. And I do quite a lot of work with ukcolumn.org in the UK. But everything gets republished up at my Substack anyway, so I guess everything ends up there.
Okay, Vanessa Beeley Substack. Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
Vanessa, I am so glad. Oh, by the way, also patreon.com/Vanessa Beeley. That's still legit. Oh, something happened.
I'm losing connection a little bit.
Oh, you're okay.
Is it my connection or your connection?
Mine is rock solid. It may be the storm, but it's okay.
Oh, it might be mine. It might be the storm. Okay, you were dipping in and out a bit. Sorry.
Oh, no. Okay. Vanessa Beeley, patreon.com is still the same.
Yeah. And Telegram, YouTube, everything under Vanessa Beeley keeps it simple.
Okay. What is the condition on the ground there? I know that there were several attacks by Israel. I think this was last week. I don't know. I haven't seen anything recent. The shutdown has taken most of the news in the United States. So a lot of things is...
I mean, how to describe how things are here following the welcome given to Al-Qaeda at the White House, and the very clear indication that Golani was going to be President Ahmed al-Sharaa, for those that don't know him as Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, formerly with ISIS in Iraq, and then of course he co-founded Nusra Front in Syria, which is effectively Al-Qaeda in Syria, and that hasn't changed despite all of the rebranding and remodeling of his image by MI6 and CIA. So basically how I'm relating that to Lebanon right now is that he's been absorbed into the so-called anti-ISIS coalition, which is sort of a double psyop because, of course, the US is behind the creation of ISIS anyway. They control the ISIS elements both in Iraq and inside Syria. Probably 30 to 40% of Jolani's Takfiri forces either are, proudly ISIS in that they wear the ISIS insignia on their uniforms, or there are many of his HTS forces, particularly the foreign Takfiris, defecting to ISIS because they perceive that Golani is drifting away very rapidly from his Takfiri origins and from the idea of creating a caliphate in Syria and in the region generally. So ISIS is actually on a pretty good recruitment drive at the moment. The fact that Golani is being brought in by Trump to allegedly fight ISIS. I say allegedly very, very sort of pointedly there, because that's literally a form of cannibalization for Golani with regards to the forces that are, as I said, comprise probably the majority of the Takfiri that have been conducting the massacres in the coastal areas and also resettling in the homes of the coastal area communities that were effectively ethnically cleansed. So he's been resettling these foreign extremists into the coastal areas, into areas in Damascus, in Homs, and Hama. So for me, things here have been, they've continued as normal. There are rumors now that after the failure, basically, of the Trump administration and Tom Barrack, his economic hitman, to persuade the Lebanese government to disarm Hezbollah and and the resistance factions, or to use the army against their own people in Hezbollah and the resistance factions across Lebanon, because Hezbollah has support outside the Shia community, of course, also within the Christian communities, the Sunni communities, and so on, as it does within the army itself. You'll often find, and I'm sure Laith has explained this, you'll often find a brother in one family in the army and another brother in Hezbollah, for example. And so for me, what is now happening, Israel is ramping up, as Tom Barrack said that he would tell them to do if the Lebanese government wouldn't pull its finger out, basically, and disarm Hezbollah, then the doors would be open to Israel to come in and do the job on behalf of Washington and Saudi Arabia and the Zionist bloc. And that effectively is what is now happening, is that Israel is ramping up the aggression in the south. It's carried out a number of bombings over the last few days. And now we see Tony Blair, the famous Tony Blair, who's also sort of been dredged up to deal with the Gaza file, is now allegedly, according to a report in Al-Akhbar, he's in Lebanese media, he's also going to come into Lebanon to try and pick up the pieces of what Tom Barrack couldn't succeed in doing. And of course, the ultimate plan is to create this so-called buffer zone to provide security for Israel in the south, which again, of course, means land grab, displacement of people from southern Lebanon, and this creation of what is euphemistically called a free trade zone, which of course means a complete colonization of that area and takeover of that area, which also, of course, runs in parallel with the plan to do that to Gaza, to create a free trade zone in Gaza, which will be a component of the India-Middle East economic corridor. That was always the plan. And all, even Trump's latest so-called peace scam incorporates elements of that original plan to effectively turn Gaza into this central free trade zone, using Gazan gas reserves, of course, Palestinian gas reserves, turning Gaza into a series of smaller concentration camps, which is effectively what they're heading towards now, where they can, the Palestinians that want to remain, that agree to be completely de-radicalized and to abandon any dreams of statehood, can remain as slave labor, effectively, for the industrial zone that would be created by the Zionist bloc, which includes Gulf states like Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, and so on.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Even, God, man, our politics is so screwed up.
Yeah, it is. It really is, actually.
Well, what I mean by that is you get Al-Jolani, who gives this message of we're going to create an Islamic caliphate. You get Donald Trump, who comes in and says we're going to make America great again. You get rando political leader in rando country saying we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And even ISIS gets fooled by Al-Jolani or Al-Jolani, whatever you want to call him, where they're like, hey, this guy doesn't seem like he wants to create a caliphate. He's hanging out with Trump in the White House. Like, meaning even ISIS is fooled. Like, even they, it's bad. I know I'm focusing on this because I'm wowed out by this a little bit. Like,
I mean, it is insane. But I think if you listen to Marco Rubio's messaging today, for example, and he talks about, what was agreed in the meeting with Trump. And at the end of it, I think the truth comes out, because he basically talks about Golani being absorbed into this anti-ISIS coalition. But then he says, Because if we don't do this, then Syria will descend into civil war, and that will open the doors. It will provide the vacuum that will allow Iran and Hezbollah and the resistance factions back in to influence the Syrian landscape. So that's where they're going with this, right?
But it sounds like, I'm sorry, please continue. I'm sorry.
No, go on. No.
I was going to say, but it sounds like it's going to descend into civil war anyway. I mean, yes. I get the sense that if ISIS is on a recruitment drive, and if Al-Jolani is, every time you see him, he's either siding with the U.S., either allows Israel to take more territory, either, like every time you see him, he's doing something less ISIS-like, short of allowing his dogs to murder ethnic Syrians.
Exactly.
Like, I guess what I'm getting at is, if they're on a recruitment drive, aren't they going to at some point target him or the government of Syria, quote unquote?
Yes, there is potential for that. The thing is, I think what they seem to be driving Syria towards is, to a degree, a copy of Lebanon. After the Taif Agreement in 1989, after the Lebanese Civil War, Lebanon devolved into effectively sectarian governance, which paralyzed all kind of political forward movement, let's say, because sects have to be equally represented in government in Lebanon, which kind of means, well, then you don't go anywhere, right? No political decisions are made to a huge degree. And everyone kind of, when there is an issue, everyone gathers behind their sect rather than behind the national identity or behind the country or behind the state. And that's very much where they're pushing Syria towards. And of course, if you go back to the CIA penned clean break doctrine back in 1996, 1997, which was commissioned by Netanyahu back then, of course, what does it talk about? It talks about the Middle East being divided into these sectarian statelets, which will make it much easier for Israel to gain a foothold and for Israel to appear the sympathetic player in the region, because there isn't unity. What is the most threatening for them is unity between the resistance. So what happened in Palestine? Palestine are predominantly Sunni Muslim, right? But they're being defended by what is predominantly Shia Muslim resistance actors or states, right? And this is what is anathema to the Zionist bloc, is to see any kind of unity, in the same way why the West disrupted pan-Arabist movements back during the creation of the parasite state of Israel, right? That if you look at where Israel was created, in Palestine, so it divided Syria and Egypt, which at the time, of course, was the Syrian Arab Republic, and was heading, just like Gaddafi was in Libya, towards a pan-Arabist movement that would have united the countries of the Arab world, given them sovereignty over their land and resources. America was never going to accept that, just as it doesn't accept it in any area in the African continent or in the Latin American continent, of course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. Where do you think that's going to go? I mean, is Al-Jolani going to be able to keep his dogs in line? Or is this going to break into, is it going to fracture? If you had to give your best guess, what do you fall on that?
I think I have actually written about this. I think ultimately, of course, it's going to fracture. I think if we look at the actual results of the meeting with Trump, they're minimal of benefit to Syria, and particularly not of benefit at all to Syrians, right? Why? Because the US and the majority of the international community still don't recognize Golani and Golani's regime on the international stage. It's not recognized as a government, right? So this is the hook that they're keeping Golani dangling on while he's acting president, effectively. He's given himself that role, and he's backed by all of the international intelligence agencies and media outlets, which are all part of the intelligence and security complex the deep state of respective countries anyway. He effectively isn't, right? He's not elected by the Syrian people. The ridiculous elections that they had, I think it's something like 6,000 people in the whole country of 23 million were actually eligible to vote. And he elected the majority of the members of the various committees that then decide on the final government elect. Right. So it was a farce. After all these complaints about President Assad and being a dictatorship and so on, and then of course what's Jolani doing? But nothing he does can be deemed as wrong at the moment. But lifting the sanctions, for example, Trump hasn't lifted the sanctions. He's given them another waiver for 6 months. So what does this do? This means that the majority of foreign investments are not going to go through, because no one's going to invest long-term in a country that is potentially still going to be under sanctions after 6 months, right? It keeps prices in the country static. It keeps the job market static because of lack of investment. It results in fire sale concessions, selling resources and infrastructure off at a very low value because investment isn't going to be coming in anytime soon, right? So it's stalling everything in effect, while giving Trump a kind of political win, you know, from the perspective of the Gulf states and those that were invested in regime change inside Syria. And then this idea that HTS should be involved in an anti-ISIS coalition. Well, this is effectively setting Jolani up for at least an internal war between his own Takfiri fighters, for sure. And he's running out of wriggle room as to how he can sell it. Because, as I said, he's already installed members of ISIS and foreign ISIS Takfiri in the government, in the Ministry of Defense, in the military. He's given them homes, he's given them citizenship. So what does he do now? He can't rescind the favors that he's given them for having supported him in Idlib for the years before he took power in December 2024. At the same time, of course, he's continuing to conduct, or his forces are continuing to conduct, ethnic cleansing, massacres, abductions, rapes, kidnappings. And the level of lawlessness inside Syria now is at a level that no one has in history ever seen before. There's common theft on the streets. People's houses are just being taken from them. There's no system. There's no law. I have people who in the beginning, because they had to a degree been suffering economically for the last 5 years of the President Assad government, were optimistic just because it was a change. Within 24, 48 hours, and I'm speaking to them now, they're saying to me, no, Vanessa, you were right. This is like 100 times worse than what we had before. And how many times do we hear this? How many times do we hear, oh, we wish Saddam Hussein was back, or we wish Muammar Gaddafi was here? You know, this is what happens. People in these countries get so infiltrated and so propagandized into believing the future is better with XYZ individual, right? And then, of course, what happens, the reality is no one is focusing on the actual final agenda, which is the partitioning of Syria, as I said, into these sectarian statelets under the control of power players, external power players. And the biggest one of that, of course, is Israel.
You know, it's wild. When Syria was falling, or before it fell, people like me and other channels were deemed to be, quote, Assad apologists, Assad puppets, useful idiots. And we would make that very argument. It's like, dude, when Assad, I mean, like when Saddam Hussein fell, and then 10 years on, it was like, hey, maybe it was better if Saddam Hussein stayed, as opposed to many people dying and what took place with Iraq. Same thing with Libya, right? And it's like
even Egypt.
Yeah, and my point of view is it has nothing to do with this idea of backing a particular political figure. It's that I know that the U.S. is dumping billions of dollars into overthrowing that country and is paying thick-necked animals to go and murder people. I know that, right? And you even had people warning, like Tulsi Gabbard would go on. I know she's, marred today, but for all intents and purposes at the time, she would go on CNN and say, Jake, we're supporting terrorists. And of course, the mainstream media was like, well, the government said they're not doing that. And it's like, okay, did Jake Tapper know that? Like, does Jake Tapper know that Jake Tapper is lying? And then immediately when Obama is out of office, articles come out, the U.S. is spending billions of dollars to overthrow the Syrian government. You have these weird situations where the U.S. military, or let's say terrorists backed by the U.S. military, are fighting terrorists backed by the CIA. And it doesn't click. People were still like, hey, Assad has to go. And then when Assad falls and the ethnic cleansing starts, they're like, oh my God, who could have foreseen that they were going to go and just murder people and all of these groups?
Yeah, I mean, I'm laughing because it's awful. But at the same time, it's just like, it's kind of repeat spin. It's just endless. And at what point do we go, oh, this has happened before somewhere?
It never clicks. It never clicks. I swear to God, it never clicks. Like, it's not like Saddam Hussein was 50 years ago, right? I mean, we're talking about something that's in recent memory. Libya wasn't 50 years ago. This was recent memory. I mean, that place is still, no, go ahead, please.
I can't hear you. No.
You can't hear me? Let's see.
I don't think it's me.
How about now? Can you hear me? You still can't hear me. You still can't hear me. Let's see. Audience, can you hear me? Audience. Let me know, audience. Can you hear me?
No, I've just tested mine. They're fine.
Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3.
Nope.
Okay, the audience says they can hear me, and my mic and everything else is running correct. I think that may be yours. 1 second.
No,
1 second.
Can't hear you.
Okay.
Do you want me to sign out and back in again?
Okay. Yeah. Okay, should be right back. Technical glitch. We will overcome. We will overcome. Well, my volume is up. Yeah, and I can hear her just fine. But for whatever reason, she said she couldn't hear me. We're going to work that out. While I wait for her, I want to make a quick change to my camera. Give me 1 second. Okay, there we are. Sharp again. Yeah, she'll be back. Okay, let me bring her back in. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. The audience can hear us both. I can hear you just fine. I don't know what it was. It's okay.
Well, I don't know.
I was just saying
this problem.
Well, I was just saying it's very frustrating. That's all. It's like this stuff is infinitely foreseeable. And I can't tell if the people who are acting shocked by this, if they were honest actors from the beginning where they were just bewildered, or if they were just lying. And, there may be some people in media, maybe the Jake Tappers of the world just lying. But you may have some real honest to God, useful idiots out there who thought this is democracy. And no, that's not democracy. It was never going to be democracy in that sense. It's unfortunate. That's all. What was Syria like before it fell? I've never had the opportunity to visit. And so I don't have a sense of what it was like before it fell and what it's like now that it has fallen, meaning the radical shift that has taken place in the lives of Syrians that couldn't leave and that have to be under Jolani's boot.
Yeah. I mean, sadly, I never visited Syria before 2011 either. And, everyone told me that pre-2011, it was one of the most secure and stable countries in the Middle East or West Asia. So I'm kind of sad myself that I didn't go there before all this regime change war nonsense horrors started. I was there, so from 2016 until the final days, really. I was living there from 2019, so during the toughest economic sanctions that were introduced by Trump, of course, being the Caesar sanctions, which really were the final nail in the kind of ability of the state to keep the country together. And that, of course, was deliberate, to plunge Syria, having really lost the military regime change war. They then plunged it into one of the darkest economic free fall ages that we've ever seen, I think. And of course, while the US was occupying Syrian oil and resources in the northeast and in Idlib through Golani and Al-Qaeda, because a lot of people don't know, but Golani had his own processing company called Al-Watad that was actually processing the stolen oil from northeast Syria. He had a monopoly on this, yes. And he was then selling it back into Turkey. Turkey, of course, was also benefiting throughout the war from the oil in the northeast anyway, and much of it was going into Israel, being brokered by Erdogan's son. But yeah, Jolani and HTS, they had a monopoly on the processing. So the oil would come from the northeast to the northwest and be processed by Al-Watad. But what was always extraordinary for me, even on some of the most dangerous front lines, like in Aleppo in 2016, various other areas, eastern Ghouta and Damascus until it was fully liberated in 2018, and southern Idlib and Hama, which I think reached final sort of agreement and liberation in 2020, which was when, of course, Russia, Turkey, and Iran brokered the Idlib deal, which effectively for the next few years enabled the reinforcing of Jolani's troops and militia, the bringing in of weapons, etc., etc. So it incubated Jolani's militia for the following 5 years to the point where they were strong enough to advance on Damascus. But Syria itself, despite all of the hardships, was a wonderful place. You know, people say no one could talk about anything. Well, I honestly have to say that was nonsense. It didn't matter whether it was one of the little kiosks on a street corner, the guy would talk to me about politics. No one would talk about anything except politics. No one would do anything except complain about not having bread, not having, they call it benzene, not having fuel for their cars, not having heating fuel, not having XYZ. Everyone spoke quite freely and quite often in a very critical way about the government. The red line to a large degree was the president. So you could criticize the government, not because anyone had imposed a red line, but because no one really wanted to go there. They would happily criticize the government, but very few would criticize the president. Having said that, just to give you a little anecdote, when I was in one of the Syrian Christian towns, Al-Skalbiya, in the northern Hama region, when they were still under attack from the terrorist groups that were camped around them in Kalat Madik, which was only 500 meters away from Skalbiya, you could actually see the Nusra Front mortar launchers from Skalbiya. Yeah. There was an attack, and I was interviewing an elderly lady, very strong lady there, and she spent at least 5 minutes cursing the president. And at the end of this, it was wonderful, because this to me was Syria. Like, she cursed him for about 5 minutes because they'd just come under attack. Like, why don't we have water? Why don't we have electricity? What, you know, everyone forgot about it. And then at the end of it, she said, but God bless the president. God bless Syria. You know, this was, it's very hard to explain this kind of patriarchal society. You know, when the West bangs on about democracy, it's such an Orientalist view, because in this culture, it is a patriarchal culture, right? In a sense, it's better to have a benevolent dictator than to try and enforce democracy on people that actually need this central governance, this central figure that they can cuss and they can criticize and they can blame him for everything. But at the end of the day, they go back to him, you know. Security was incredible. I could walk out at 2, 3 a.m. in the center of Damascus on my own, and no fear of anyone stealing something or attacking me or even hassling me. It was, it was an amazing place, despite all the hardships. No electricity, no water, very little food supply in the end, and so on. It was besieged, but the people were amazing. There was something about them that was just honestly really magical. And now when it breaks my heart when I think about it now, and I speak to people that are still there and they can't leave. Even for, let's say, the Sunni Muslim population, which is the majority, those that are not complying with the Takfiri ideology, the extremists, sort of Wahhabi sectarian ideology, are also being hunted down, right? I mean, I have people I know who I can't talk to at the moment because they're in hiding, because they're afraid, because of their rejection of Jolani, they're going to be hunted down and persecuted, right? There's people all the time trying to get out, not only Alawites in the coastal areas, but the whole country has just descended into a lawless vacuum where really these predators, which are the Takfiri thugs semi under the control of Jolani, are hunting people down under the pretext of regime remnants or we found weapons. And the problem is that there's no objective journalism being done now. The majority of journalists that are in there are the mainstream journalists that, of course, were kept out largely by the former government because they spent the entire war lying about the chemical weapons, about the prisons and so on. And completely misrepresenting the truth on the ground. For the majority, there were some very good exceptions. No, I mean, now it's just plunged into an atmosphere of fear and distrust. I think that's the saddest thing. Syrians always had a very strong trust among themselves, and now nobody trusts their neighbor because everyone's betraying each other to try and protect themselves. That's the environment that's being created.
Who controls Jolani?
That's a really good question. Which direction do you want him pulled in?
Well, that's what makes it interesting, right? That's why it's an interesting question to me. He is being pulled in so many different directions, and it seems like he's dancing just to stay afloat, right? Like, I need to make connections with the Russians. I need to make connections with the Israelis. I need to make connections with the Americans. I need to make connections with the Turks. And it's like, okay, dude, how many masters are you going to actually have, right? Who controls him?
I think this is a very interesting question. Funnily enough, I had this conversation with the ambassador for Venezuela this morning, and we actually agreed on it because obviously he was formerly in Syria. He's now ambassador of Syria and Lebanon. Although, because Maduro doesn't recognize Jolani's regime, he hasn't yet gone back to Damascus. I think basically what you have now, so you have an overarching US Washington influence. You have the British ensconced in Damascus, basically running the rebranding campaign for Jolani and his administration. We know that Tony Blair's former security advisor, now Keir Starmer's security advisor, Jonathan Powell, and his organization, I think he's now left that organization to go and work for Keir Starmer, Intermediate, was running the rebranding campaign of Jolani from 2021 onwards. They were also heavily involved in basically presenting the Al-Qaeda groups and affiliates basically as political alternatives to President Assad. So they were whitewashing these groups for the period of the regime change war anyway. So operatives from that organization are actually ensconced in the palace in Damascus and are, as I said, coaching Golani, Asad al-Shaibani in particular. We saw Shaibani having a meeting or an interview, with Tony Blair at Davos. So that's the British role, which of course to a large degree it always has been. In my opinion, British intelligence was running the operations in Syria throughout the regime change war, and even pre-regime change war. The entire idea was concocted between Tony Blair and George Bush post 9/11. But I think if you then kind of zoom out, you have the overall influence is Washington. But Trump in particular doesn't necessarily want to expend a lot of energy on Syria because he's looking, he's expanding his war theaters further afield. And as I said, in Africa, Latin America, potentially Iran. He's going to maintain the pressure on the region, but he doesn't want to expend too much. And he's also still got to, in theory, sort out what's happening in Ukraine, etc. So you have Washington at the top of the pile, right? But with as little involvement on the ground as possible. So what has then happened? The ground landscape has been handed over to Turkey in the north, Russia in the west and the northeast, and potentially the south. And what is interesting is that the US is now establishing a forward operating base in Mezzeh Air Base, which was a former Syrian army air base to the south of Damascus. If you draw a line from Mount Hermon, which is the highest, most strategic mountain on the border between Syria and Lebanon, which Israel took over from December 2024. If you draw a line from that to where the US is now going to establish this forward operating base, across to the American base of Al-Tanf, which has been there throughout the regime change war on the border with Iraq and Jordan, you effectively cut southern Syria away from Damascus. Then after so that will be under the control of Israel, with the US providing surveillance and security guarantees for Israel, demilitarization, no HTS elements to be allowed into the area, the potential for Russia to bring in a kind of UNIFIL operation, in theory, to prevent expansion of Israel, but I don't believe that for 1 minute. That just wouldn't work, because in that case, Russia would come into confrontation with Washington and Israel in the south, and that's not going to happen.
Right.
And then after the Moscow meeting, there were agreements that I've had confirmed to me, both from Russia and from Syria, that Russia may well establish bases in Homs and Hama. So that's to the northern border of Lebanon and to the south of Idlib, coming into the coast where it already has its bases. And it's basically now bringing in personnel and hardware to those areas. It's also building up its personnel and equipment at the Karmishli air base, military base, which is in the northeast. So in my opinion, what you're seeing is, from the beginning, Israel lobbied Trump to keep Russia in Syria, because Russia will provide Israel with the ability to push back against Turkish expansionism beyond the north. They're happy for now for Turkey to have control over Aleppo and the northern border, right? Of course, Turkey is trying to expand through a number of ways. It tried to bring in weapons under the auspices of bringing them in for Golani. It got bombed by Israel. Now it's trying to extend the Adana agreement into, I think it's 30 kilometers in to Syria, and it's trying to put air defenses into that area, right? Because it wants to effectively have control of the entire northern border from the northwest to Iraq, and to expel the Kurds. Mm-hmm. But the Kurds, in my opinion, are not going to be assimilated into Jolani's Takfiri forces. I think what will happen, the Kurds will be given some kind of autonomous region in the northeast, similar to what they were given in Iraq post the 2003 invasion, where they still have control of the oil and the resources, and they provide the link for Israel to create the David's corridor from the south going up the eastern border of Syria into the northeast. Now, why is Russia can only expand to the extent it is because it's doing this with agreement with Washington and Israel. It wouldn't happen otherwise. And for Russia, the important thing is, one, to maintain their foothold or their footprint in the Middle East, in Syria, but most importantly, it gives them a launch pad to Africa, which is really their most important market right now.
They want, right?
Yeah,
that's what they want. They want to maintain. Yeah, they definitely
without depending on Turkey, because if they had to relinquish Syria, they would be using Turkish airspace, and so it would put their dependency back on Turkey again. So that's also very important for Russia. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can't trust Turkey. As far as you know. Erdogan is a slippery eel, man. Yeah, Erdogan only looks out for his own interests. One last thing before I let you go, Hezbollah. What is taking place within relation to the resistance as we speak? Israel is making this argument that Al-Jolani is allowing corridors for Iran to assist Hezbollah. I mean, obviously they're going to, this is the same guy who showed up 20 years ago with a cartoon bomb saying, in 10 minutes, Iran is going to have a bomb. So take it with a grain of salt. But the fact that Israel is being attacked and the fact that Hezbollah sent that letter effectively saying, look, we need to work together. I'm sorry, that Lebanon is being attacked. The fact that Hezbollah sent the letter saying we need to work together in order to push back on this
We need
aggression.
to support Lebanese sovereignty, and we need to defend the sovereignty of Lebanon. Yeah.
Is there any chance that that's going to be accepted and taken up by the government, or not so much?
I think the government is in a very difficult situation because, you have the Prime Minister, Nawaf Salam, who obviously is a puppet of Washington and Israel. As I said, this is the difficulty because of the Taif agreement. You have all of the sects equally represented within government, so that actually creates a form of paralysis, right? But you do have a President, Joseph Aoun, who was formerly head of the military. And I think, in a sense, he does understand the situation, and hence why Barak has shown so much frustration. The government, in his view, is just not doing what it's told, and it hasn't disarmed Hezbollah, and the army hasn't disarmed Hezbollah, and all the economic pressure that has been put on Lebanon hasn't worked, and Hezbollah is still in existence and is still basically saying to Israel, we still have the power to be able to provide deterrence against you, and we will use that. The country also knows that if Israel were to weaponize, for example, Golani and the Takfiri forces, then Hezbollah is absolutely necessary because the Lebanese armed forces, sponsored by the US and kept at a level where they can't defend the country against Israel, they can to a degree against the Takfiri forces, but the two together, no, they can't. So Hezbollah is necessary to the country if things escalate, which they do appear to be doing. And we can't forget also that Pete Hegseth very recently made the threat to the Iraqi Defense Minister Abbasi, saying, look, when we kick off something in the region, the resistance actors in Iraq better not respond because you know what will happen. This is a direct threat. This is a declaration of war against Iraq. In my opinion, for now, I think they feel they have Hezbollah contained to a degree. In my opinion, the next target will actually be Iraq, or it could be together. I don't know. Everyone here is a bit sort of bated breath, waiting to see what happens. But I think it's necessary for them, in their opinion, to weaken Iraq again.
Really? So you think that the attacks will be against Iraq? For the longest time, people were thinking Iran, and then the pressure seemed deflated on that attack.
Yeah. I think Yemen also, because I think the sudden re-emergence, because it never really died down, all of the violence and genocide in Darfur, in Somalia, in Eritrea, where is that? It's on the Horn of Africa, on the Red Sea, facing Yemen. So in my opinion, that's also related to what might potentially happen with Yemen. And Yemen now is talking quite belligerently and quite rightly, because they've just arrested 21 spies from the coalition of Saudi Arabia, Israel, UK, and United States. They are now talking about, they're gathering the tribes in Sadr, which is the most northernmost province on the border with Hejaz, Saudi Arabia. And they're talking about, if Saudi Arabia doesn't, come into line and actually start respecting Yemeni sovereignty and actually coming to a deal that ensures Yemen's sovereignty and resource sovereignty, then there's potential for an invasion of Hejaz.
Wow.
So
Ansarallah has some balls on them. I give them credit.
Yeah, they do.
Like I've always,
I mean, really,
I've been impressed, like just shocked by their willingness to extend themselves in this way. And they've been willing to do it all the way through. They are extraordinary. Yeah. Have you ever had the opportunity to visit Yemen by chance?
No, I've been trying since I think 2014. And I got quite close a couple of times, and then, it got sideswept. And the most recent was only about a year ago, and then I can't remember what happened. Oh, I know. Israel bombed the airport at Sana'a, so all of their planes were put out of action. Of course, because they were starting to open the doors to foreigners coming in to actually see what was happening. And so what did Israel do? It bombed the airport, so that could no longer happen. And to maintain the siege on Yemen, of course.
Vanessa, you are awesome.
Thank you.
I swear to God, man, you have lived an exciting life. And by the, exciting doesn't mean calm. Doesn't mean safe. Doesn't mean any of those things. But nevertheless, I've always been impressed. So thank you for this. And just for the audience to know, Vanessa Beeley, she is an investigative journalist. You can find her work on Twitter. Well, on Vanessa Beeley Substack, there's that. But you can also find her on Twitter at Vanessa Beeley. You can support her work at patreon.com/Vanessa Beeley. Vanessa, you be safe and you have a good one, okay? Thank you for this.
Yeah, you too, Jamal. Take care. Thanks. Bye.
Vanessa is awesome. Shout out to her. She has my deepest appreciation for joining me. She is a great